And this is the only thing that would entice me to come to the US is this event.
Do we have a slide or something? Wait, is this?
While we're getting set up, my name is Shannon. I'm Vice President of the Vana Foundation. The Vana Foundation exists as a steward of the Vana protocol, and I'm really thrilled to be interviewing the person who's the reason why I'm at Vana, Anna Kozlauskas, who is the creator of the Vana protocol and CEO of Open Data Labs. Open Data Labs is a core technical contributor to the Vana protocol. And Anna has a really exciting MIT history that we'll get into. But the topic of our chat is decentralized data market. So there's no AI without data, and that's really the starting point for Vana that we're going to get into. So maybe Anna, just to kick off, what is the market failure around data today? How does supply and demand for data work? And what are some of the particular challenges around data markets as it relates to AI?
Yeah, maybe to take a quick step back. So my co-founder and I actually met in this room in Ramesh's class a long time ago, yeah, maybe 6 years ago now. But I come from kind of a background at the intersection of decentralization and AI. So I got into crypto, actually mining Ethereum, getting like GPUs from the loading docks. If people know the stat of loading docks, it's like the dumpster where all the undergrads go to get free computers, set them up, mine, and got really fascinated with the idea of kind of being able to build systems where you don't have to trust a central entity, right? Instead, you're just trusting a whole node, and that kind of can shift power back towards the individual. It was particularly fascinating to me because I was actually really into central banks. Like I had a picture of Janet Yellen in my high school bedroom and like worked at the Fed. And it was just like the currency is central to it all. And so kind of seeing the way that you could build a decentralized currency when I got here was extremely interesting. So kind of joined the early MIT Bitcoin Club back in 2015, got extremely into just kind of decentralization and being able to use cryptographic primitives to shift power from what would typically be like a corporation back towards the individual. And then, got into AI through some research I was doing at CSAIL, which is MIT's AI lab. I was doing kind of natural language processing research at the time.
Come on up.
Oh yeah, come on in. And so, we have this conversation today, kind of give some high level, almost like history of Vana, kind of where we are. And then if folks want to go into like a deeper technical presentation, I'll be doing that tomorrow afternoon. So especially if you're looking to build on the protocol. What time is that? It's
4:30.
4:30.
In Bartos.
Okay, cool. And the old media lab, I think. Here?
Downstairs.
Okay. Same building downstairs. Okay, so going towards the question of like, what's the market failure of data? Sorry, I just looked backwards. I was like, is that me? Like, am I in the wrong? Okay. So market failure for data. Are you familiar with like Solid Project or Urbit? I think if folks are coming from MIT, often they have history of kind of like, how do we make it so that users own their data, right? And I think very broadly, people think that is an important topic, right? And we want users to have like individual data ownership. I think that to date, though, we really haven't seen like large-scale adoption of those protocols, right? And often you end up with this chicken and egg problem where maybe people do want to own their data, but then developers aren't necessarily building applications in like a user-owned way. And if you're a developer today and you're living in the world of how data works today and you've gotten users to onboard data onto your platform, you probably want to build a moat around that, right? And that's just because of the capitalist incentives that exist, right? Like if you've gone through the effort of having a user bring their data in, you want to maintain that garden. And what we've ended up with, maybe people have seen this image of like the walled gardens of big tech, right? But we just keep having more and more walled gardens. And so we describe this at Vana as really this market failure around data, where users at the end of the day are creating a huge amount of value through the data that they generate, right? And I think a lot of people don't even think of their data as legally their own. You might not realize it, but in the same way that when you park your car in a parking lot, like the parking lot doesn't own your car, when you put your data in a platform, it's still entirely yours, right? So you can go to any platform, you can go to Instagram, like Tesla, like anything you're using, you can always go export that data. Sometimes they make it tricky to do, but you always are able to get it all within 30 days. So yeah, kind of the summary of our approach is to solve that market failure, having users like export their data across these different platforms and connect it in a way that's fully self-sovereign. So they're really able to kind of permission it out with keys that they control, bring it throughout applications, and pool it. And we'll get into some more of that later too.
Yeah, maybe just to share a little bit more about Vana's approach to solving these failures. You talked about data sovereignty. Why is that important, and what are some of the ancillary principles around data portability that Vana is thinking about as well?
Yeah, so data is one of the core inputs to AI, right? You have research, compute, and data. A lot of people are familiar with compute because it's very easy to see okay, they're building lots of data centers, they're buying lots of GPUs, that's pretty visible. I think data is kind of more of this hidden part that often actually isn't talked about because it's uncomfortable the way that data is bought and sold today. But data is really that core resource for AI, right? And so if you think far out, or even you think about kind of the models that are getting trained today, we're kind of in this difficult spot where there aren't great economic rights around data. And so there's a lot of arguments happening, right? I think artists are pretty upset that their work is being trained on. We have situations where it's your data that's actually being used to train AI, but then you don't own that AI model, right? And I mean, the extreme version of this is if someone created an AI version of Anna, right? I've got 10 autonomous AI Anna agents. I really want to own those, right? I don't want them to get locked inside of almost the walled gardens or jails of a big tech company. I want true sovereignty. But in order to have that, you need true ownership rights of the data and to actually have kind of this permissionless system. So that's how I would kind of frame data rights today.
Okay, cool. We work in the Web3 space. That means that there was a Web 1, a Web 2, we're now in Web 3. Are we headed to a Web 4 with Internet of Agents, and what are some of the principles, that attracted you about Web 1 that we might want to see as we think about the next version of the Internet?
Yeah, there's actually a picture I love from it's around the year 2000 at the Media Lab, and it's these really nerdy students wearing their data physically on them, right? And the view of how people thought the internet was going to evolve back then was that actually how could you trust anyone with your data? If you wanted to have data on yourself, you would literally have to carry it about, right? And so yeah, it's hilarious to just think about how different the world has actually played out. So I think that actually the early vision of the internet, and Tim Berners-Lee with Solid, so Tim Berners-Lee is the creator of the internet and kind of started Solid project to try to solve this problem of data ownership. And so yeah, I think that we actually had this idea in the early internet, and then we ended up with kind of perverse incentives, and I think the cloud really fueled things where people realized, hey, if I have this data, I can actually monetize a lot of it, I can build a big monopoly over it as a corporation, and now I think we're starting to see a bit of a shift back, and a lot more awareness too. I think that previously the idea of owning your data was maybe a little bit ideological, of people who are really hardcore privacy folks are yeah, I want that. Oh yeah, feel free to come on in.
There's plenty of space in the front.
We can move back. Yeah.
So yeah, kind of this question of data ownership shifting from purely this ideological, almost preference question to actually a really big economic question, right? If you ask most people today, would you trade your data from 5 platforms to own part of ChatGPT? Most people would actually really want that trade, right? And we're kind of in this world where people are really scared of kind of this centralization of AI, where one single company builds this super AGI, which automates everybody's jobs. But it's really actually a market failure. And if you can properly solve that market failure, then you can have both very powerful technology, which can help us with all sorts of scientific discoveries, and also really strong user rights.
Awesome. Jumping into Vana and how you've been thinking about solutions to this problem. Maybe just give people a bit of a journey from, the origin story to MIT. It was conceived here, almost maybe over 3 years ago now. How has, Vana evolved from the first days of your ideas here at MIT to where we are today at Vana?
Yeah, so I'd say like the earliest thinking was really just me training AI models and being like, I wish I could train on this data, but I don't want to go work at Facebook to get the data. And what I was seeing is like a lot of my best, the really smart AI people would go work at big tech companies because they wanted access to data and compute. And kind of this like frustration where it was like, wait, like those companies don't even own the data. Like, why is it that that's the only place you can really get it? And so I think, and a lot of early inspiration from Solid Project, which I think has pioneered a lot of the like federated architectures that work very well. So yeah, I mean, super early on, we were basically looking for ways to be able to have large groups of people like contribute data and then pay them to train AI models. So the earliest version, which was actually in like Ramesh's class, Emerging Ventures, we were paying people to label data on their phones. This was like when people were training image models, like convolutional neural nets, if people remember, kind of satellite imagery of ships. And so we actually were in like, we went to the Philippines and to Timor-Leste, and we're having people label kind of on low-end Android devices, like images of ships and kind of, that was the earliest starting point. What we started to see that there were kind of different parts in the data market. There was like data labeling and then kind of data collection, where rather than having kind of anyone like look at an image and say, is this a stop sign or not, you're actually trying to buy a specific person's data, right? So you're trying to, for example, like one of the big tech companies wanted to buy iMessage data. Facebook or Apple would never really sell that data. So you basically go find 10,000 people who are willing to sell this data. And often those, like 60% of those contracts actually fail. It's really constrained, because I think that the value prop of like, we'll give you $20 for your data, it almost feels like you're like selling your blood or something. Like it doesn't necessarily, like it's not a good trade for most people. But I think that if you shift towards more thinking about it as like equity in AI or true ownership over a data set and getting to decide what should this data set do or what should this AI model do, then you see kind of much broader participation. And yeah, I mean, actually, who is like a founder in the room, just to get a sense? Yeah, okay. We had like a bunch of founders come into Ramesh's class back in the day. Honestly, it was an extremely like roundabout journey. So this is like the more polished version. But yeah, we tried a bunch of different things. Some of them worked. I think we were a little too early. Like I think the idea of owning your data was still super abstract, even 3 or 4 years. And so just kind of grinded through and like found, okay, how do we get people to care about owning their data? Like what are aspects of this that we can try to get people to care about? And then had like some major wins along the way, which we can get more into too, that kind of finally got us to this point where now we have kind of this broad ecosystem of people who are really aligned towards actually pushing forward these self-sovereign data rights and training better AI models on top of those.
Yeah, maybe rewind just 10 months ago when things really started to take off and Vana was in the news for lots of interesting reasons. Maybe talk about that and then, how that gave you the momentum to launch a layer 1 blockchain just, 5 months ago.
Yeah, so I guess one of the big like inflection points for us was around the Reddit data DAO, where what we were seeing. So generally, like you can think about, okay, maybe I should own my data, and that had been around for a while. But actually around Reddit's IPO, people started looking into their finances in great detail. And what they started to see is like, wow, Reddit is making $200 million selling user data just for AI training. And so honestly, it was just like a lot of other people who did marketing for us by covering the fact that Reddit was earning this much money selling user data that kind of created the conditions to be able to form the Reddit data DAO. A data DAO, it's basically like a labor union for data where you can have a large group of people pool their data and then collectively decide what happens with it. The reason why that's important is that my data on its own is not that valuable for AI training, right? You need to be able to pool a large amount of data to be able to use it for training. And so, yeah, and you have some nice cryptographic guarantees where it really is this collective group that's deciding what's allowed to happen with the data or not. So yeah, with the Reddit Data DAO, I think it was this really interesting moment where they launched, and at first it was mostly just crypto people joining who were coming in and contributing their data. And then one of the interesting things about Vana is that it kind of tokenizes data, where you kind of have this share of a data set. And people started speculating on that data token. And what that meant is that if you had a lot of karma, you get rewarded based on the square root of your karma. You could make like $300 or $400 for your data. And so a bunch of people were just like who had a ton of karma came in and contributed great data. So we ended up seeing, I think, around 140,000 people who contributed their data. And now there's an ex-Google Brain guy who trained like a shitposting model on the data, because it's like Reddit data, right? So it's just, that's what it's good at. But you can have, yeah, there are other models we can talk about later. And there was actually this one really important moment I want to talk about where Reddit actually tried to shut down the Reddit Data DAO. And they contacted us and they were like, you can't do this, like you're violating the API terms. But because of the way Vana is built, where the user is actually their own data processor, right? So in the same way that with like Bitcoin or Ethereum, like Bitcoin isn't your bank, right? Like you're acting as your own bank because you actually control the private keys, which control your Bitcoin. In the case of Vana, you are your own data processor. You are the one controlling the keys that actually grant access to your data. And because of that, users have every legal right to their data, right? So the Reddit Data DAO was actually able to stay up and kind of continue, whereas if we had tried to do this using more of a centralized approach, it wouldn't have been possible. So I think that was like a really major milestone. And then a bunch of people came and wanted to build other data DAOs for different platforms. So now there's like a Tesla one, a Twitter one, there like any major data source you can think of. Yeah, there's probably someone building a data DAO around it. If you have a data source you want to build one around, you can do it fully permissionlessly, right? You don't need the permission of Reddit or of Tesla to be able to build because the users have the legal right, right? And you're just really using that user's legal right to be able to get that data and then pool it and kind of use it in different ways.
Cool. And the layer one blockchain launch. Maybe talk a little bit about the decision that went into, such a huge technical lift to do that, and that was only 13 weeks ago, and maybe also include like the incredible achievements we've seen since you've done that as well.
Yeah, no, it's been a very crazy quarter for sure. I think, so I guess what we were seeing with the Reddit Data DAO is we wanted to scale this in a pretty big way, right? Where it was like, okay, this is working. How do we make this work across a bunch of different data sources? And how do you also really ensure that it actually is collectively owned? Right? And I think there are cases where if you maintain too much control, like a centralized database or something like that, for too long, it becomes really hard to shift it towards more collective ownership longer term, right? So maybe to go into some technical detail of like how the chain works, maybe, actually, how many people are like crypto people somewhat? Okay, and then maybe AI people. Okay, how many people have heard of a trusted execution environment, a TEE? Okay, so I would say I will go into a lot more technical detail tomorrow. So if you want to learn more about kind of the architecture of the chain, but I'll talk actually about a couple of the nodes that are important. So there are two main kinds of nodes on Vana. One of them they're kind of like the transaction validators. These are similar to like a layer one validator node you might be familiar with in like Ethereum or something similar. And they are basically keeping state on the network. So they're keeping track of kind of who has permission to what data and what operations are they allowed to run. And then often blockchains don't work well with private data, right? Usually you think of a blockchain as kind of making everything publicly available. So the way that Vana works is that there are kind of pointers to the data which is encrypted. And then whenever you're working with the data, that happens inside of a data validator, which is running as a trusted execution environment. And so those data validators are basically reading state from the chain to see, hey, can this operation actually be run on the data? And only if it's allowed can you then actually run an operation on the data. The reason why that's important is that, and this kind of touches on like market failure for data as well. Data is this really weird asset where like if I see your data, like how do you know I don't take a copy of it? right? And we call that the double spend problem for data, where it's very hard to have trustless data markets because you just don't know what someone's going to do, right? And so the way that we've solved this is that, oh, feel free to come in, yeah.
Face in the front. About 100 square feet right here. This can
Literally getting.
Wow.
All right, please continue.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess talking about kind of that double spend problem for data, then you're able to have this environment where you really can just grant access for someone to be able to run a specific operation, like train an AI model on your data. It kind of shifts it from like selling your data to more like renting it out for specific jobs. And so that's what like Vana as kind of this core blockchain network enables through both of those different validator types. In terms of mainnet launch, yeah, it's been like a really amazing, yeah, so I think we've onboarded around 12 million data points to the network. All of them are verified, right? So the problem you also run into with data is like, imagine if all of us wanted to pool like our WhatsApp messages. If someone wanted to take more ownership of the data set, if Ramesh was like, I'm going to pretend to be 100 people to try to take over this data set, then you have this kind of attack, right? Where you might have someone contributing data that's not legitimate or that's low quality in. So the way Vana works around that is called proof of contribution. What that does is it maps data, which is necessarily different for everybody, and it actually scores it so that you're mapping this thing which is not fungible, because all the data is different, to this fungible score, which is kind of the same across everybody, and then gives people ownership in the data set proportional to that. And so all the data, those 12 million data points, have been validated through proof of contribution, and that's implemented at the data set level. So if you are validating 23andMe data, that's different from how you validate Twitter data than how you validate Reddit data. And that's all implemented by the builders who are actually building these data DAOs. I think so our team's about 30 people, and then people who are building data DAOs on Vana, it's probably closer to about 50 people at this point. And so there are just like a huge number of people building this new kind of business model that's possible around user-owned data. And then I think I think probably around 40 live data DAOs, several hundred on testnet that are kind of getting ready and progressively move onto mainnet. Some of the really successful ones I might talk about, there's one that's on car telemetry data, so they're actually having people contribute their Tesla data. And that's an interesting data set because so much of Tesla's value comes from the fact that they have a lead against self-driving cars of having a ton of data, right? And so they actually are doing really well also from the perspective of being able to sell data to like car battery companies, other companies that really want access to Tesla data that Tesla would never let you get, except the Tesla data DAO, the car one, is kind of able to do that. Yeah, I think over 1 million users have contributed data across like one of the different data DAOs. And now we kicked off, so one of the guiding use cases, which I can talk about tomorrow afternoon too in more detail, which is like, how do you make a user-owned foundation model? Right? So usually people think about a foundation model as something that only a single company can train, right? Because it takes like a huge amount of compute. You might invest like $10, $100 million of compute, a ton of data, and then, yeah, people think of that as this centralized thing. If you look at what's limiting a lot of the models today, it's actually data, right? And people talk about it as this kind of data wall. If you look at what Llama 3 is trained on, it's around 15 trillion words. And if you look at the whole public internet, that's also around 15 trillion words, right? So we've basically taken everything publicly available, given it to AI. If we, as like, if we want to continue to push AI research forward, we need more data from somewhere. And so what we orient towards is like, how do you get 100 million people contributing their data so that you can actually build like the best foundation model? And so a couple weeks ago in London, we announced Collective One, which is the first user-owned foundation model. It's a partnership. Are the Flower AI guys here? They'll be here tomorrow. Okay, cool. It's a partnership between Flower, which is one of the kind of the leading federated training framework. They'll share more on this tomorrow as well. And using data from a bunch of different data DAOs on Vana. And what it offers a path towards is actually like literally building the best AI model and making it collectively owned by the people who've contributed data, right? I think often people, when you think about AI and kind of the risk of centralization, ideologically, people are like, yeah, we want to avoid a single company owning it, right? But then you also have to think very tactically, right? Which is like, okay, what can a large group of people do to actually build a better AI model that's going to compete with some of these frontier labs who have billions of dollars of funding? And I think that data really is that path. So yeah, Collective One was a really big milestone for us in Q1.
Cool. We have, I think, just probably four minutes left. You also recently shipped, even though it's just been 13 weeks since you launched mainnet, some pretty significant upgrades to the protocol to help create the foundations for decentralized data markets and the financial system for user-owned data. Can you just share at a high level some of the motivation for why that upgrade happened now and some of the key features of that?
Yeah, I think, so we had this upgrade in mind for a while. It was sort of, okay, at some point we're going to implement kind of this standard across all these different data DAOs and stuff. We were just seeing, like, I used to know everyone building a data DAO on Vana, and now, like, I don't, right? There are just a bunch of people permissionlessly building these applications. And so we thought that it was important to roll out this standard so people kind of know how to think about what a data DAO is. So the big part of the standard is actually like an economic standard called the VRC20 standard. If you're coming from crypto, you might be familiar with an ERC20 token. In this case, we're talking about kind of a VRC20 token, which I think sometimes token might be the wrong way to think about it. It's really about having like a share of ownership over the data set. So you can vote on what happens and kind of represent, okay, this is the data that I've contributed. So yeah, the way that the upgrade works is now those VRC20 tokens where we've kind of laid out the standards of what the supply should be and kind of the core economics around them. They're used for data access. So when you want to actually access data, that's what you're using. And that happens all through the data validators. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I can describe it in kind of more technical detail tomorrow. But the high level is that there's a new market forming around data, right? There were some like people who were asking, like, how might I build an index fund around data? Like, what would people wanting to build like data futures and stuff like that? And so what they needed is kind of this standard to understand, okay, this is data as a financial asset, and this is how you can build on top of it. So that's what VRC20 does.
Yeah, so I guess just to close it out, in the next 3 to 5 years, what do you think the Vana ecosystem will look like if user-owned data takes off as an asset class?
Yeah, 3 to 5 years is a very long time horizon. So
but
I definitely will. I mean, how long do we have? Yeah. So I mean, I think that probably the closest thing to look at is like the Ethereum ecosystem, right? And I think that they've done a really amazing job. Like, so they launched in 2015, and then in 2017, you had this year of ICOs where people were coming to understand this is now what's possible with decentralized finance. Then you had kind of NFTs. I think that right now, one, it's still super early, right? We're not even a year into actually launching mainnet. So I think that starting to see kind of new primitives form around like the financialization of data. So seeing data DAOs for every single major platform. I think seeing a leading foundation model that actually beats the kind of big AI labs, often in open source AI and decentralized AI. I feel like we're not ambitious enough where the goal is to beat the benchmark that a big lab has, where actually it should be like, how can we be 10 times better, right? How can we be 100 times better? So actually really seeing that play out from a model performance perspective of like, we've trained the best AI model because we have access to the most data. I think tracking and seeing all the different kinds of companies that are possible on top of user-owned data. Like I always say, like, I wish I could just clone myself and like build data DAOs or build with these different data sets, because so much of what I think the business of the next 5 years is going to be built on is AI, which fundamentally comes down to data, right? And so if you can have access to different kinds of data sets, like you can build interesting like healthcare applications using all of someone's messages, all of someone's healthcare history, their biometrics. So yeah, I think we're going to see like this insane ecosystem, and it's still quite early, but yeah, I would measure it as like, how do we get, like, I mean, 100 million is what we're orienting towards now. Well, 1% of the way there. Then probably 5-year time horizon, 1 billion, probably 10 billion people will be alive by that, right? So we will have grown to that. And then like developers, you can kind of track that. But really just having people build great, successful, businesses on top of user-owned data.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Anna. We're going to wrap up, but please join Anna tomorrow, 4:30 to 5:30, for a technical workshop in the same, Ramesh, it's in the same building tomorrow, right? Bartos Theater. Vana.org. Join our Discord if you're a builder and want to get involved in the community and the technical work that's going on. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you want to build anything with user-owned data or build a data DAO, just DM me on Twitter. I'm extraordinarily responsive. So, yeah.
Chat with you.
So let's just slide everybody in. Otherwise, we're going to start another room, but just you can stay where you are. All right, the next part.